My name is Sophia and I was 29 when all this mess started. To be honest, even then I felt like the ground was about to shift from under my feet, although on the surface everything looked more or less decent. I work as a manager in a large trading company, in one of those glass buildings in the very center of the city, where the elevators are always rushing up, and the faces in the corridors are always tired. I have been there since I graduated from college. 7 years have passed. Already, 7 exhausting, endless years in which each day seemed like a step in place, albeit on a good salary, which, however, was barely enough for rent, bills, and the rare cup of coffee outside the home. I live alone, in a modest apartment with 1 bedroom, if you can even call it a bedroom, in a house that looks like it is at least half a century old, a tiny kitchen, where the pans hang on old nails, and a bathroom with peeling tiles, where the faucet has been leaking for years, but it's all mine, even if it's rented, and I've learned to find a certain sense of stability in it, even if the ceiling occasionally rustles with the footsteps of the neighbors upstairs. But to understand what happened next, I need to tell you a little about my family, because that's where, as it turns out, the long thread of events that would soon turn my life upside down begins. My parents, Carol and David, they're special not in the sense of being kind and caring, but rather in the mercilessly strict way they always looked at things, especially when it came to me. I remember how on the day of my 18th birthday, they sat me down at the kitchen table, next to that same old refrigerator that hummed even louder than my father's words, and gave me their ceremonial speech. "You're an adult now, Sophia," my mother said, crossing her arms over her chest. "It's time to find your way in this world." And that was it. No warm hugs, no "we're here if you need anything," no help with college fees, no money for books or dorm room. I suddenly realized that I was alone, and that this adulthood was not a fairy tale, but a heavy burden that I would now have to bear alone. Meanwhile, my younger sister Emma, who is only 4 years younger than me, was drowning in care and attention. From the moment she was born, her parents had been saving money for her education, planning her path in advance, as if her future was something self-evident. They thought it was normal to buy her everything she wanted: fashionable clothes, the latest gadgets, theater tickets, and even cosmetics from those boutiques that I passed by, not daring to even look into the windows. Emma was their princess, their shining hope, and I was just a first attempt, a failed rehearsal. It was so obvious that sometimes I wanted to scream, "Why? Why am I an outsider in my own family?" College was a real test. I shared a squalid apartment with 2 other girls, Sarah and Jessica. We had it all: cockroaches that had taken over the kitchen before us, a broken heater that turned the apartment into an ice cave in the winter, and a lazy landlord who promised to fix it but never showed up. I worked at a grocery store, sorting fruit, stacking shelves, scrubbing floors, anything to somehow pay for the rent, for textbooks, for a cup of cheap coffee between classes. Sometimes, especially during exam periods, I lived on instant noodles, day after day, the same taste, the same bowl, because that was all I could afford. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor in this shabby shack, holding a plastic cup heated in the microwave, and thinking, this is what a struggle looks like. The only ray of light was my grandmother Ruth, my father's mother. She lived far away, in another state, in a large house with a well-kept garden and a spacious terrace, where she liked to stroll in an old cashmere robe. She had become rich in her youth through successful investments and had always been good with money, but in recent years her health had begun to fail. She had serious hearing problems, so much so that even hearing aids could not help her hear phone calls, so almost all of our communication took place through text messages. Every few months, I would get a short, almost dry, but incredibly important message from her: "I sent you some money, check the account." It wasn't just money, it was an opportunity, sometimes $1,000, sometimes 2, and every time I saw that message, I would start crying. I cried because it meant that at least for a while, I could eat real food, buy myself a jacket before winter, or finally afford new textbooks instead of trying to barter them with other students or copy pages from the library. I always wrote her back long, grateful messages. "Grandma, you saved my life again. I don't know what I would do without you. Thank you so much." And in response, she would send me such warm, familiar words that would make a lump rise in my throat. I'm proud of you, Sophia. The main thing is to focus on your studies, the rest will come later. Thanks to her help, I had only one part-time job instead of 2 or even 3, like my classmates. I could finally attend all the lectures, be part of the process, learn, and not survive, and I know for sure, without her, I would never have finished school. Now I'm 29, and I work tirelessly, saving every penny possible. I dream of my own place, not a luxurious apartment with a view of the park, no, just a place where every corner will be mine, truly mine, without tenants, without the fear of a rent increase. I deny myself everything, no expensive restaurants, no fashionable clothes, only the bare necessities, no trips, no vacations. Every dollar goes into a savings account, as a symbol of my hope. My family and I hardly communicate. My parents call maybe once a month, usually not to ask how I'm doing, but to complain about how bad everything is. Emma, if she writes at all, it's only to throw in another "look what a bracelet they bought me," or "my parents and I are flying to Miami for the weekend." I look at her posts on social media, designer bags, cocktails on terraces, beaches, palm trees. It must be nice to live like this, to be loved, to be the one. And I feel a heaviness growing inside me, guilt, because I write to Grandma Ruth less and less, and she's getting older, and her health is getting worse. But I work 10 hours a day, every weekday, no exceptions, no indulgences, and by the evening, when I finally open the door to my tiny apartment, my feet hurt so much that sometimes I don't even take off my shoes right away, but just lean against the wall in the hallway, letting the fatigue pass through me like a cold draft. Weekends aren't vacations, as those who don't know what it's like to be a single adult woman might think. They're just a chance to finally do all the things I've been putting off: doing laundry, mopping the floor, going to the store, sorting through the mailbox, and trying to bring order to a life that always seems to be on the brink of chaos. I tried to write to Grandma Ruth as often as I could, but I still felt like it wasn't enough. Like my little messages between tasks didn't do justice to how much I thought about her every week, how much I cared about her, how I remembered her hands, her voice, her slow, caring steps on the wooden floor of her house. So, as my 30th birthday approached, an anniversary that somehow seemed more important to me than any of the previous ones, as if it represented something important, something grown up, serious, final, I decided to do something different. I sat on the couch after work, clutching my phone in my hands, and texted my grandmother, inviting her to a small party at my house, small and cozy, with pizza and cake, a few friends, and candles that I would blow out with one wish: to see her again, even if only for a little while. I was nervous as I waited for a response, imagining her walking into my apartment in her light cape and a warm smile, but what came back was a short, neatly written message: she couldn't come, health issues, she wasn't in a condition to travel that far, she was sorry. She still remembered how much I loved chocolate cake, and she had already given my gift to my parents, they would bring it. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying not to feel offended, not to feel empty, not to give in to disappointment. I understood, of course I understood, health is the main thing, but it still hurt a little. My birthday had come. I cleaned the apartment, put on a new dress, the only thing I allowed myself to buy in recent months, and put plastic plates on the table, ordered pizza, bought a cake in advance from my favorite bakery on the corner. My colleagues came: Lisa, Mike, and Jennifer. We laughed, remembered funny work stories, shared stories about how someone mixed up a report again, or how the coffee machine spilled half the water on the floor. Ordinary conversations, but warm, real, and then, almost at the very end of the evening, my parents and Emma came, as always, last. Mom walked in first, her eyes darting around the room as if she were looking for something to complain about. "This place is so small, Sophia," she said, as if she were holding back her disgust. Dad squinted at my overhead light. "The lighting is terrible," he said, with that expression I remember from my childhood. "Everything is wrong, everything is wrong." Emma rolled her eyes without a word and plopped down on my shabby couch without invitation, clutching her phone and not even glancing in my direction. They handed me presents, From Mom, cheap-smelling perfume in questionable packaging. From Dad, a gift certificate to a restaurant I would never go to even if it were right next door. From Emma, a book I was never going to read. It was as if they had grabbed the nearest items from the checkout line on their way to me. "Oh, here's a present from your grandma," Mom said, casually pulling a vase wrapped in paper out of her bag. I picked it up. The crystal was heavy, cold, and shimmering beautifully in the light of my cheap lamp. It was something expensive, something real. "She wanted you to have it," Mom added, not looking me in the eye. "Thank you," I said quietly, feeling a lump start to rise in my throat. They spent exactly 30 minutes at my place. I noted the time, not on purpose, but my eyes kept falling on the clock. Emma spent the entire evening on her phone, barely raising her head. Mom complained about the traffic jams, about how difficult it was to find parking. Dad kept looking at his watch, as if somewhere out there, beyond these four walls, was his real life, and he was desperately trying to get back to it. "Well, we have to go," Mom said suddenly, standing up abruptly. "We still have things to do. It's been a busy day." Dad nodded, not saying a word, already reaching for his jacket, and just like that, without hugs, without happy birthday, without anything resembling love, they were gone. My friend stayed up late. We laughed, ate cake, shared stories, and the evening was generally a success, but there was still a feeling of emptiness in my chest, because this is my family, this is what I have, this is what I understand more and more clearly with each passing year. Later, when everything was cleaned up, when the guests had left and there was only silence in the apartment, I sat on the couch, holding that very vase in my hands. It really was beautiful, heavy, cool, noble. There was something more to it than just glass. There was a feeling that my grandmother wanted to tell me with this gift. I remember, "I am close." I took out my phone and wrote her a short message. "Thank you, Grandma, she is amazing." It had been a month since my birthday, and life had returned to its usual routine: morning coffee, the subway, the office, the paperwork, reports, more reports. It was Tuesday. In the afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, looking through the quarterly figures, my eyes already tired, my brain in a fog, and then the phone rang. A name appeared on the screen: Rachel, my cousin. I hadn't heard from her in months. "Hi, Rachel, how are you?" I said, expecting to hear about someone's engagement, rumors, or maybe a family date that I'd forgotten again, but her voice was different, strained, trembling. "Sophia, I had to call you. To be honest, I'm in shock." Shocked by what? I didn't understand at first. About Emma buying a house, at her age. How could she even afford it? I froze, my hand hovering over the table, staring at the screen that I could no longer see. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, as if afraid to hear the answer. "The house, Sophia. Emma bought a new house. Don't tell me you didn't know." There was a pause on the other end, and in that pause, it felt like something in my chest had snapped. "Rachel, I have no idea what you're talking about. What house?" There was absolute silence for a few seconds, and then her voice grew quieter, as if she wasn't sure whether she should continue. "Oh my God, Sophia, you really didn't know, did you?" Rachel's voice cracked like porcelain hitting stone, and there was that special kind of bewilderment that comes from someone opening your eyes to something you thought should be obvious. 2 days ago Emma had a housewarming party, a real one, with a crowd of people, 50 or more. The house is beautiful, not huge, but so cozy, clean, with a veranda and a small garden in the back, and everyone, literally everyone, was asking where you were. I listened, and with each word I found it hard to breathe, as if someone were slowly, deliberately tightening a belt around my chest. "I wasn't invited, I wasn't even informed, and I'm her sister." "That's what I thought," Rachel continued, "when I didn't see you there. But your parents, they told everyone that you don't like loud parties, that you're too reserved for that." I froze, clutching the phone in my fingers, and the sound of the sea began to roar in my ears, but Rachel didn't stop. "And that's not the worst of it. I overheard your mother whispering to my mother that you were jealous of Emma, that you were upset about her purchase. Can you imagine? She said it straight out. Sophia is just jealous. She doesn't like that her little sister has achieved more." Anger, bright and cutting, washed over me like a powerful wave. It was like someone had punched me in the gut so hard I lost my footing, jealous, bitter. I didn't even know Emma owned a house. No one, not one person in my family, had said a word to me. Rachel, I swear, I said, my fingers shaking with anger. I had no idea Emma owned a house, not a word, not a hint. Jesus, she whispered into the phone, Sophia, this is so weird. When the call ended, I just sat there, holding the phone in my hands, as if it could give me any answers. My little sister, the 25-year-old girl who, just yesterday, I thought she was playing The Sims and showing off her new makeup from TikTok, had bought a house, and was throwing a housewarming party, and everyone was there, except me. She had just graduated from university and was working part-time at some cozy coffee shop on the corner that served cappuccinos with pictures on the phone. Where was the money for the house coming from? Where was this reality that she had hidden from me? The next morning I woke up early, although I hadn't really slept, turned on the kettle, but didn't make tea. Instead, I dialed Emma's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright, carefree, as if nothing had happened. Emma, I began, trying to speak calmly, I heard that you bought a house. Congratulations, but why didn't you invite me to the housewarming? In response, laughter, real, ringing, but with a false note. Oh, Sophia, you don't like parties. Why would I invite you to something you don't like anyway? I pressed my lips together. That's not true, and you know it. I would have come, I would have liked to be there. She snorted, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. I took a deep breath, feeling a bad feeling growing inside me. Emma, where did you get the money to buy a house? There was dead silence for a few seconds, and then her voice changed, cold, detached. It was a gift, from my mom and dad. It's simple, and anyway, it's none of your business. I have to go. And she hung up, so simple, so easy, like our conversation meant nothing. The next 3 months were torture. I'd log on to social media and see her posting photos of her new home, bright rooms, a cozy kitchen, candles and glass holders, blankets draped over the chairs. Under each photo, captions like, so grateful to my wonderful parents for making this possible. Each post felt like a slap in the face. It was as if each photo screamed, here, look at this, Sophia, look at what you'll never have. I thought back to college, living in a tiny, drafty apartment with cockroaches, eating ramen for weeks on end, freezing under a thin blanket while they were apparently saving up for Emma, so they could one day hand her the keys to a new house. And then came another turning point. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was coming up. I really wanted to go. I wanted to be a part of this day. I'd even bought them a gift, a beautiful, expensive frame for their wedding photo, a silver one with delicate engravings. It cost almost $200, an amount I'd never spent on anyone, except maybe my grandmother, but I thought it would mean something. It would show that I remembered, that I cared, that I wanted to be there. One evening, scrolling through my Facebook feed, I came across my mom's post, a photo of a restaurant downtown, with the text, soon to celebrate 35 years together. We're waiting for all our loved ones. No call, no text, not a single word addressed to me. I figured they were probably just busy preparing, but 3 days before the date, I got a text from Grandma Ruth. Honey, I've been feeling a little better lately. I'm really looking forward to David and Carol's anniversary. It will be wonderful to see you in person again. I know you've been so busy with work, and we haven't had a chance to see each other. I looked at the screen, and a warmth spread in my chest, which immediately mixed with a pang of pain. She really thought I was invited, and I wanted to think so too. Finally, a chance to see her, to see family, to be together, at least for a moment, at least for an evening. But the next day, as soon as I returned home after another exhausting day at work, and had just begun to take off my shoes, the phone rang out suddenly, piercing the evening silence with a sharp, resonant sound. And when I saw the name on the screen, Mom, my heart made a strange leap in my chest, as if it had a premonition that the conversation would not be easy. Hi, Mom, I answered, trying to give my voice as much warmth as possible. I'm looking forward to the party in honor of your anniversary. I already bought you and Dad a gift. There was a short but tense pause on the line, And then my mother's voice cut through it, reserved, awkward, somehow alien. "Sophia, we need to talk about Saturday. We decided that we don't want you to come." I froze, almost dropping the phone. The phrase seemed so sudden and absurd. "What do you mean when you say you don't want me to come?" I couldn't believe my ears. My mother took a breath, and, as if reciting a rehearsed phrase, continued, "We had to reduce the number of places. In fact, you don't have to be there. You can come to our house another time and congratulate us. Why don't you want me to be there?" I almost whispered, but my mother didn't answer. The sound cut off. She simply hung up. I remained sitting on the edge of the couch, still holding the phone, as if it could bring this conversation back to me and give me a chance to change something, to explain, to ask, to demand an explanation. Once, perhaps, I would have been offended, would have cried, and simply stayed home, suppressing the anger and pain, but this time it was different. Grandma Ruth would be there. I hadn't seen her in so many years, and she, I now knew, was waiting for me. I was not going to let my parents, whose approval I had sought in vain all my life, decide again whether I was worthy of being part of a family. The next day, I wrapped the gift frame in beautiful paper, attached a card with warm words to it, and courier mailed it to their address with a note wishing them a happy anniversary and expressing the hope that they would have a wonderful evening. And on Saturday, I put on my best dress, the same one I wore to the interview when I was hired for my current job, and, gathering my hair into a neat bun, went to the restaurant. When I entered the hall, the first thing I noticed was the rows of tables covered with white tablecloths, among which sat about 40 people, relatives, acquaintances, friends of the family. And in the very center, closer to the stage, in the place of honor, in a chair with a high back, sat Grandma Ruth. She looked fragile, much smaller than I remembered her, but she was wearing a wonderful blue dress that emphasized her eyes, and her hair was neatly styled, as if she had spent the whole morning on it. As soon as my parents noticed me, I saw panic and fear flash across their faces. Mom jumped up and hurriedly came to me. "Sophia." Her voice was sharp, almost hissing. "What are you doing here?" "I told you not to come." Dad appeared behind her, frowning. "Please, just go away. This is neither the time nor the place." But before I could respond, a loud voice rang out from the room. Grandma Ruth's hearing problems always made her speak a little louder than usual, but at that moment it was a blessing. "Sophia, my beautiful granddaughter. I'm so glad to see you," she exclaimed, and her voice carried throughout the restaurant, causing the guests to turn around. All heads turned in our direction. Mom and Dad froze. "David, Carol," Grandma continued, not hiding her joy, "bring Sophia to me. Let her sit next to me. I haven't seen this girl for a long time." The guests began to whisper among themselves. One of the distant relatives nodded to me in greeting, and my parents, realizing that they simply had nowhere to retreat now, reluctantly led me to the table of honor. Emma, who was sitting on the other side of Granny, looked like she was about to explode. Her lips pressed together, her brows furrowed. She was pulled up from her seat, forced across the table so I could sit next to Granny. "There's my girl," Grandma said, squeezing my hand with her thin palm, which still felt strong. "Now that's a real family holiday." Dinner had begun, people were eating, laughing, raising glasses, but there was tension at my parents' table. Mom avoided my gaze, constantly adjusting her napkin. Dad looked at his plate, as if studying its relief. Emma glared at me across the table, as if my presence had destroyed her entire carefully constructed world. The guests raised toasts. Uncle Mike talked about how generous and attentive my parents were, how always ready to help and support, and Aunt Susan mentioned that they were an example of good parents and spouses. I sat there listening to people heap compliments on Carol and David, and I couldn't help but feel like they were talking about someone else entirely, not the people who had cut me off from my family. Not the people who had forgotten how I had survived on cheap noodles and copied pages from school books while they saved up for a house for Emma, but Grandma Ruth would squeeze my hand every now and then, as if to give me a sign. "I'm here, I'm with you, I'm so glad you came, darling," she would whisper, and her voice was like music. "It's been too long, I've missed you, I love having you here." And I sat there with her, feeling like some tiny, real piece of love had finally found me. After all these years, she looked leaner than I remembered. As if time had left its mark on her, not in the form of wrinkles but in the slight thinness of her shoulders, the fine line of her cheekbones, but her eyes still sparkled, sharp, clear, piercing, as if she could still see through people, discern the lies and the truth and the pain they were hiding. Around her neck glittered a diamond necklace, a thing I was sure I had never seen before, a delicate, graceful, but obviously expensive piece of jewelry that she wore with the grace that only women who know their own worth have. About halfway through the meal, when the main course was served, roast duck with caramelized carrots and a thin wine sauce, Aunt Ruth turned to me, fork in hand, and suddenly asked, "Sophia, how do you like living in the house I gave you for your 30th birthday?" There was a clink as someone dropped a cutlery on a nearby table, and for a moment the restaurant was completely, deadly silent, as if someone had turned off the sound for the entire world. Everyone froze, plates were forgotten, glasses stopped in midair. I felt the blood drain from my face, and, moving closer, leaned towards her ear, saying clearly as I could, "Grandma, I don't know about any house. For my birthday, Mom and Dad gave me a beautiful vase, they said it was from you." I saw her face change in a matter of seconds, first confusion, as if she didn't immediately believe what she heard, then shock, and then a sharp, piercing anger that was reflected in the wrinkles around her lips and the tension in her chin. "A vase? What vase?" Her voice became higher, harsher, and at that moment I heard two metallic sounds simultaneously break the silence. My parents dropped their forks on their plates. I turned around, their faces were whiter than the tablecloth on the table, and my father's hands were shaking as if he was trying to hold something back inside. The whole room seemed to come alive and freeze at the same time. People began to whisper. Some looked cautiously in the direction of my grandmother, some looked at my parents, as if trying to get to the bottom of what was happening, and then my grandmother slowly turned to them, no longer smiling. "David, Carol," she said so loudly that she was heard in the farthest corner of the room, "I want you to explain to me right now where the money went that I gave you to buy a house for Sophia." Silence fell again, so thick that it seemed you could hear the beating of other people's hearts. Father stood up first, his chair scraping the floor so loudly that some of the guests' shoulders twitched. He stood, shaking all over, as if from a cold that wasn't there. Mother sat, hiding her face in a napkin, her shoulders shaking. "Mom, maybe we should discuss this in private," he said, but his voice shook. "No," Grandma said firmly. "I want to know now. I gave you the money 3 months ago. I helped you with the realtor. I signed all the paperwork so that the house would be registered in Sophia's name, and I gave you the keys to give to her for her birthday. Where is this house?" My father swallowed, looked at my mother for support, then back at my grandmother, and finally said what I knew would change everything. "We gave the house to Emma." The restaurant exploded with a dull noise. Someone gasped, someone's hand holding a glass shook, and the glass slammed loudly onto the porcelain. "What?" Grandma's voice was so loud that for a moment it seemed as if the walls were shaking. She straightened up, looking not at her parents now, but at Emma, who suddenly jumped up from her seat. "This house is mine," she screamed, her eyes shining, her face flushed, and her lips trembling. "Mom and Dad gave it to me. I'm not giving it to anyone." "Emma, sit down." Grandma Ruth snapped. "This house was bought for Sophia, with my money. I don't care." Emma almost screamed. "This is my house now. I've been living there for months. You can't just take him away from me like that." She stood there, her fists clenched, her face twisted with tears and anger. The entire room, the entire restaurant, the people who had just been eating dessert and chatting about work and the weather, were now watching us without blinking. I saw some people take out their phones and start filming. Some of the neighbors were whispering, pointing at us. Grandma Ruth stood up, slowly, with dignity, like a queen who had been handed proof of treason at court. "David, Carol," she said, "come here." Now, her parents exchanged glances, and, as if tied together by the same rope, reluctantly approached her. She pressed her finger to her hearing aid, leaning forward slightly, and, to my surprise, her voice became very quiet, almost a whisper, which was extremely unusual for her. I couldn't hear what she was saying to them, no one else in the room could. But I could clearly see my father nodding desperately, as if begging her to believe me. to justify herself, to convince me. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, as if she was sick, as if she was about to feel sick. Their faces were growing paler with each passing second, as if someone was slowly squeezing the life out of them, drawing out everything they had been hiding for years, and I sat there, motionless, feeling a heavy weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by another, stranger, deeper sense of truth that had finally come to light. After about 2 minutes of their intense conversation, which, despite the hushed tone, was felt by everyone present like a thunderstorm approaching through transparent walls, my parents returned to their table, carrying something broken inside them, drowning in shame and fear. They looked like they had seen a ghost, like they had walked through an opening abyss where they had to come face to face with what they had been running from for years, the truth. Dad's hands were still shaking, his fingers clenched into fists to somehow contain their excitement, and Mom's makeup had turned into a flowing shadow of pain and guilt, washed away by tears that she did not even try to hide. As if with difficulty suppressing the tremor in his voice, Dad stood up, cleared his throat, looked around the room full of guests, and said loudly, not looking anyone in the eye, "Thank you all for coming tonight. We are grateful to you for sharing this day with us, but this is where the party ends. It is time for us to finish. Please begin packing. It is time for everyone to go home." A muffled murmur passed through the room, like a wave washing over the edges of the tablecloths. The people at the tables began to exchange glances, folding napkins, picking up bags, filling the silence with whispers in which I caught fragments of sentences, like small stones flying in my direction. "Did you hear what she said about the house? Poor thing, her parents just up and gave her house to her sister. What kind of people do this to their own daughter?" Emma was still sitting at the table, but she was no longer shouting or arguing. Her body was limp, her shoulders hunched, her hands wrapped around her head, as if she were trying to hide inside herself, to disappear, to erase what was happening. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, and now she seemed not so much angry as broken, vulnerable, like a person who had just learned for the first time that lies do have consequences. I turned to my grandmother and asked quietly, "Would you like to spend the night with me?" "Yes, dear," she said, looking straight into my eyes. "I don't want to stay with them after what they did." We silently gathered her purse, coat, and scarf, and I helped her stand up and wrapped my arm around hers. "I'll call a courier to pick up your things from their house," I added. "That would be ideal." She nodded, holding back a tired, bitter smile. We left the restaurant together, while my parents frantically tried to explain to the remaining guests why an evening that was supposed to be a celebration of love and devotion had turned into a public drama. They rushed between the tables, trying to save face, but looking at them, I knew that what had been destroyed that evening could not be restored by words and apologies. Emma did not even look up at us, did not move, only clutched her head tighter in her hands, as if she wanted to dissolve into the darkness of the tablecloth. From the car, I immediately called a courier. "I need someone who can pick up a suitcase and some personal belongings from one address and deliver them to another," I said into the phone, dictating the address of my parents' house and my own. "The things belong to Ruth Rutherford. Just say that you are picking up her things for Sophia." When we arrived at my place, Grandma sank heavily onto the sofa, and I noticed how much she had changed that evening, as if it had drained her of strength, as if the experience had broken something in her soul. She looked exhausted, tired to the core. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. A courier had brought her suitcase and a small bag that turned out to contain medication. I thanked him, gave him a tip, and he left, leaving us alone in my tiny living room. "There you go, Grandma," I said, sitting down next to her and adjusting the pillow under her back. "You have everything you need." "Thank you, Sophia," she whispered, pressing my hand to her chest. "You're such a good girl. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what your parents were really like." That night, we talked longer than we ever had before. She sat in my shabby chair by the window, and I, curled up on the sofa, listened and talked, remembered, confessed, shared. I told her everything about my work, about my loneliness, about how I fought for every step up, and then we returned to this evening, to the moment when everything became clear. "I just don't understand," I said, looking at her. "How could they think they could keep this from you? Did they really think you'd never know that they gave my house to Emma?" Grandma sighed heavily, and there was so much bitterness in that sigh, so much exhaustion, that for the first time I felt how deeply all this had hurt her. I think they hoped I wouldn't live to see this, she said, looking out the window into the darkness. My health had been poor lately, and they knew it. They must have thought I'd either die or become too infirm to come and see the house in person. It's convenient, isn't it? The coldness in her voice shocked me. She'd never spoken like that before, direct, harsh, without excuses. It's terrible, I whispered, almost in disbelief. Daddy sent me pictures of your house on my phone, she added after a pause. He said you were happy, that you liked your new house. I believed him, because I trusted him. I stood up and went into the kitchen, picked up the same vase I'd placed on the shelf by the window, and returned to the living room. Here, Grandma, I handed it to her. This is what they gave me for my birthday. Instead of keys to the house, she picked up the vase and turned it over, squinting. Her thin fingers slid carefully over the recesses of the glass, as if she were looking for traces of a lie. We both laughed, sitting on my shabby sofa, and the laughter that escaped our throats after everything that had happened that day was not so much from amusement as from pent-up tension, from the realization of the madness of a situation in which there were so many lies that even the vase, this beautiful, heavy object, now seemed to me a symbol of everything absurd and twisted. A vase instead of a house, said Grandmother, wiping away tears with the corner of her handkerchief, trying to maintain dignity despite her trembling fingers. It's certainly lovely, Sophia, but it's definitely not a house. When our laughter, so bitter and sincere, finally died down, her face became serious again, her eyes narrowed, the corners of her mouth drooped, and a special firmness appeared in her posture. Sophia, I need to tell you, she said calmly, what exactly I told your parents this evening. I think you should know everything. I nodded without interrupting. Your father, she continued, uses my personal bank account. For years, whenever they needed money, for things for Emma, for repairs, for a vacation, or just for their own needs, they took it out of my account. I gave him access. Because he's my son, I trusted him. I froze, my eyes widened, and my breath caught for a second. I didn't know. I had no idea. Starting tomorrow, she said firmly, I'm cutting them off from my money completely. No more free withdrawals, no more financial support. It's all over. And also, I told them I'm changing my will. I've already contacted a lawyer. All my funds will be divided between you, my grandchildren, you, and Rachel. My parents and Emma will get small amounts, just enough to make the will uncontestable, but no more. They can no longer pretend they deserved more. It will all be yours, Sophia, because you were there when they turned their backs. We talked until almost 2 in the morning, those long, hard, but strangely intimate hours in which, like a confession, old wounds and new truths were revealed, and everything that had never been said between us before. When we finally went to bed, Grandma in my bed and me on the couch with a blanket, I suddenly felt that we had become closer to each other that night than ever before. And in the morning, when the sun was just breaking through the crack in the curtain, there was a knock on my door. I approached, smoothing my hair, still sleepy, and, opening the door, froze. My parents were standing there. Both looked as if they had not slept for a minute. My father was holding a bunch of keys. These are for you, he said, his voice barely audible. Avoiding my gaze, the keys to the house, I took them, silently, without permission. This was supposed to be yours. The next day, I drove Grandma Ruth to the train station. She was returning home to complete all the formalities, updating the will, reviewing the bank accounts, closing everything that had allowed my parents to manipulate her trust for so long. After the train left, I did not immediately return to the apartment. I went to where I really belonged now, to my real home, the one that should have belonged to me from the very beginning. The house turned out to be small, but there was something warm about it. A neat front garden, a wooden fence, flower boxes under the windows, all this spoke of care and comfort. But as soon as I walked inside, I immediately realized that it was chosen with me in mind. The kitchen was painted in pink tones, with lace curtains and pastel tiles. The bedroom was lavender, Emma's favorite color. I stood in the middle of this room and felt old feelings rising inside, resentment, disappointment, a sense of someone else's life, into which I was not allowed, but now it was mine. And the first thing I did was call a locksmith and change all the locks. Then I called the landlord and said that I was moving out. No more rented apartment, no more someone else's territory, I was moving into my own life. A week passed, I was settling in, hanging up my things, rearranging the furniture, and then one day there was a knock on the door. Emma was standing there. She looked bad, her hair was uncombed, her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes were swollen from crying. "Sophia," she said, "I need to talk to you." I was silent. "I live with my mom and dad, and it's terrible. They make me get a job, they don't give me money, they argue all the time. I just can't be there anymore. Can I stay with you? Until I get back on my feet?" I looked at her, not believing what I was hearing. "No, Emma, this is my home. You already had a chance to live here, but you knew it wasn't yours." She began to whine. "Sophia, we're sisters. Sisters don't steal from each other. Sisters don't cut each other out of their lives." I exhaled and looked up at her. "You made a choice, Emma, now live with it." I closed the door in her face, simple and without hysteria, and it wasn't cruel, it was a boundary I should have drawn years ago. Over the next month, my parents called me again and again. My mother's voice was shaking, my father was pleading. "Please, Sophia," my mother said on one of the calls, "we made a mistake, we're sorry, just talk to Grandma, ask her not to change the will." I listened to her in silence, and then said quietly but firmly, "I won't do it. You don't regret what you did, you only regret getting caught." I hung up and blocked their numbers, and it wasn't anger in that, it was freedom. It had been 6 months since that dinner, which should have been a celebration of love and family togetherness but instead exposed the wounds hidden beneath the veneer of decorum and revealed the truth that had been suppressed for too long. I hadn't spoken to my parents or Emma since, and despite how it sounded, I felt no longing or regret. I didn't miss their drama, their constant favoritism, their endless attempts to prove that I was somehow worthy of love and approval. It had passed from my life like a storm passing, leaving behind a silence in which I could finally truly breathe. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm home. I painted the walls, choosing shades that reflect me, not someone else's preferences. Soft blues in the kitchen, where the sunlight streams through the curtains in the morning, and warm grays in the bedroom, where I feel calm and at peace. I bought furniture, not fancy or expensive, but something that reflects my style, cozy, reliable, real. In the backyard, I planted a vegetable garden, a little corner of living earth in which I grew tomatoes, basil, green onions with my own hands, and every time I cut the first crop from the garden, I smile. Because it is the result of my own efforts. Most importantly, I visit Grandma Ruth regularly. Every other weekend I go to her state. We drink tea in her garden, make her signature cherry pies, watch old black and white movies, discuss life, laugh and cry if necessary. She tells me about how she invested her money wisely from a young age, how she thought decades ahead, how hard it was for a woman of her generation to build her wealth, but she did it not for the luxury of it, but so that one day she could pass it on to someone who would truly appreciate it. "You are the granddaughter I always dreamed of," she told me last month, looking into my eyes with such warmth that I couldn't hold back my tears. "Smart, independent, honest. Your parents raised Emma to be a princess, and you grew up to be a warrior. They gave you the hardest thing, but you made a strength out of it." Last week, Grandma Ruth's lawyer called me. His voice was dry and businesslike, but there was meaning in his words that I had long been hesitant to hear. "The new will is ready," he said. "When Mrs. Rutherford passes away, most of her estate will go to you. Your parents and sister will each get $5,000. It was a minimal amount, enough so that they couldn't challenge her last will, but not enough to matter. My life hasn't changed dramatically since then, but it has become easier. I still work at my trading company, but I no longer wake up in anxiety, counting every penny. I allow myself to dine out without feeling guilty, buy clothes when I want, not when they're already falling apart. I went on vacation for the first time in years, alone, to a lake house, where I spent a week reading books and walking barefoot in the grass. Life is not luxurious, but it is free, and perhaps that is what real wealth is. Sometimes I still come across Emma's posts on social media. She lives with her parents, works somewhere in retail, and, in her own words, hates every second of this life. Her posts are full of bitterness, hints of betrayal, and phrases like family is those who betray first. And I don't feel sorry for her, because she became a victim not because of fate, but because of her choices. My parents are now trying to get to me through other relatives. Sometimes Aunt Susan calls just to see how I'm doing. Sometimes Uncle Mike writes that he misses our meetings. But I see right through them. They want me to forgive, to forget, to return to the family circle, as if nothing happened. But I answer the same thing. They made their choice when they stole my home, my life, my opportunity to feel like a loved daughter. Now I build my own life, excluding them from it. Some think I'm too harsh, but they are your family, they tell me. They need forgiveness, but I've learned an important truth. Blood relationship does not give anyone the right to treat you badly. Family should support, not break. They should rejoice in your successes, not take them away. They should protect, not betray. Now I have a real family. Grandma Ruth is a person who loves me sincerely, without conditions, without manipulation. She wants me to be happy, strong, free. She is my home, my root, my support. And the rest, let them live as they please. I am no longer obliged to save them. And now, 30 years later, for the first time in my life I can say, I am happy. I have my own home, earned through pain, but which has become a symbol of freedom. I have financial stability, which came not through luck, but through perseverance. I have the love and respect of the only person I truly consider family. 30 years have passed, but I finally got what I truly deserved.